Snow remembers what people do not. It holds the imprint of a boot, the curl of a branch, the fall of a feather, and it keeps each shape a little while longer than the world intends. Out beyond the tall spine of man-made stone and old sorcery, where the air thins and the light takes on a bluish, glassy color, snow covers everything. Ridges of rock, the sprawl of dark pines, the faces of ancient hills scoured to a pale bone. Wind moves over this country like a hand smoothing a bed, quieting the edges. It hums in the needle-topped forests, sifts across frozen tarns, and runs its fingers over the ruins left by peoples who did not last. In that hush of white, the first cold the world ever knew still lives. It is older than kings, older than the first oath sworn, older than any story told beside a fire. If you listen there, in the northern silences where breath becomes a faint cloud and even the crows do not call, you can hear a different kind of memory, a history of frost. The people who walk the Southlands have spoken for ages of cold that moves with purpose and listens without hurrying, of shapes that make even the bravest step lighter and speak softer. They have given many names to these figures, those who come before dawn, the blue-eyed shadows, the quiet hunters. When the oldest are pressed for what they know, they do not give numbers or measures. They speak instead of a feeling, like the moment when a window blows open on a winter night, and the room you know is suddenly not yours, and the place you meant to sleep is now a place where something watches. In that sensation lies the first and last truth of the White Walkers. The others, the kings of winter whose crowns are carved from the cold itself. Their story begins the way snow begins, with a fall that feels like silence. Before there were the fences of men and their clever tools. Forests ruled the valleys. The trees were not merely wood. They were mind and witness. The children of the forest lived among them. Small, light-boned people who wore the night the way martens wear their sleek fur, slipping through bracken and root with a comfort that made the ground seem to move aside for them. They knew the language of rivers and the listening of stones. They carved faces into pale trees so that the forest might look back at them, and so that the world itself might keep watch. They were wary of the first men who came over the sea beating iron at their belts and wearing the need to tame in their eyes. Axes bit white wood. Earth bled sap. The children answered with the old arts, songs that were not quite sound and offerings laid in circles around the roots of seeing trees. And for a time the struggle rose and fell like a storm that no one could end. Some tellings say the children did not mean to make enemies of winter. They only meant to make a weapon of it. They took a man and bound him to the oldest tree they could find. Hands spread on bark as carved eyes watched. Into his chest they pressed black glass stolen from the deep heart of the earth. Stone that had once been fire and now held darkness so true that it could unmake heat. The man's scream stopped not with breath but with the turning of his eyes from their human color to that blue so pale it seems white until it looks at you, and then you feel you are being seen by ice. When he rose, the air around him breathed cold. He was not what he had been. He was not a man anymore. He was the first of winter given will. Others say that the White Walkers were always there, sleeping in the far places the living avoid, long before the children arranged such a ritual. They woke when the world grew loud. They came as the trees were cut and the rivers bridged and the nights were filled with hammering. Perhaps both stories are true in the fashion of truths that wear many coats. Maybe a thing that sleeps can be made anew when it rises, both ancient and born in one moment, both memory and weapon. However they came, their steps did not mark the snow like ours, and their breath did not smoke in the air. The cold went with them like a cloak. They walked now with the care of creatures who counted time by winters, not by seasons. Their armor was of a craft that did not come from anvils, more like grown frost than beaten steel, glinting like hoarfrost at dawn, translucence over darkness. In their hands they carried blades that took heat from whatever they touched. You could feel a room turn sharp when such a blade passed through it, as if all your warm thoughts were being drawn away. Birds fell quiet on branches. Dogs tucked their noses under their tails. In their wake came the dead, and this was not like the stories where the fallen sleep under cairns and leave their troubles to be sorted by gods. These dead stood when the walkers called, and the blue was in their eyes too, though thin and uneven like paint brushed on rotten wood. A White Walker raised a hand and corpses shaped themselves into answers. A White Walker gestured and the world had fewer heartbeats in it. The children who had dreamed of a weapon felt the blade turn back toward the hand that made it, and no song could close the wound. The living remember that first great winter the way we remember pain from a long illness. In fragments. They call it the long night, a generation of darkness when days were a rumor and stars looked like holes where light had tried and failed to return. Towns drifted into snowbanks and vanished. Fields became sheets of white that sang when the wind crossed them. Fires needed feeding every hour, and still they died on their hearths like old men. The White Walkers came down in their pale ranks, not running because they did not have to, the cold itself keeping pace with them. People gathered under any banner that would hold. A woman with a lantern who led her village into the woods the locals feared. A man with one hand who swore to keep one gate until he did not. A child who sang spells no one taught her. Each story is a little different, but they all agree that it ended, and that is the part to hold to. The darkness passed. Some say a last hero came with a blade that woke light. Some say it was a woman whose red prayers burned like dawn. Some say the children and men together made a wall of stone and secrets and old cold that stopped the walkers' feet. However it was, the night broke. That is the unarguable thing. People returned to their fields. Babies were born who had never known a sky without sun. The world put firewood by the door again. And because memory is most faithfully kept when it has a task to perform, men swore oaths upon that edge of the world to watch forever. They built a wall, miles and miles of ice, piled and smoothed and strengthened with whatever quiet powers the children would lend, until it was a cliff that cut the horizon and made a line between the land of wolves and the land of men. In its shadow, men took black cloaks and called themselves brothers. They vowed to take no wives and hold no lands and be the sword that guards the realms of men. They did what people do with miracles. They turned it into duty. When they looked north, they did not see a border so much as a promise made to the yet unborn. And for a long time, winter seemed content to mutter behind that promise. But even walls made of the oldest ice cannot command the future to be obedient. Stones forget. Vows thin when the mouths that speak them are too few. As the centuries turned, the watch grew lean. Some brothers joined to flee the law, some to escape the noise of life, some because they had nowhere else to sleep. A Lord Commander replaced another, and the names of the ancient heroes yellowed at the edges like old letters. The wall stood. It always stood. When travelers passed under its shadow, they felt small and safe, and then they forgot to feel small and remembered only the safety. The tales of the others turned into something you told children to keep them from wandering at night. Fear, like all living things, struggles for food. When it starves, it sleeps. Yet there were always hints for those who chose to listen. Beyond the farthest watchtower, where maps water into blankness and old trails are pressed flat by drifting white, hunters told of quiet mornings when the frost drew patterns on their beards from the inside, not the outside, and of tracks that were not tracks so much as a refusal of the snow to accept weight. Some wild men who made their homes beyond the wall, forest strong and crow-wary, spoke in low voices of nights when something watched their fires through the trees and did not blink. There were chiefs who emptied their cups on a certain patch of ground at the edge of camp. Not because they believed in it, they said, but because their grandfathers did. Women wrapped newborns in furs and hung charms at the tent doors, old bits of obsidian on gut strings. People who live where the world is most honest learn to trust their grandfathers' superstitions. They are usually simply knowledge written in a language the young have forgotten. Legends about a king of winter persisted like a tune you can't place but keep humming. One story favored in the stone halls of the north told of a man in black, an early Lord Commander, who looked beyond the line of torchlight one night and saw a woman on the snow plain, white as the drift and crowned in frost. She was beautiful in the way a winter dawn can be beautiful, sharp enough to cut a man. He brought her into his hall and made her his queen, and for 13 years, his brothers became his subjects and the old oaths bent. People were given to the cold the way a king gives coins at a feast. The realm itself began to feel that drain, like a patient bled to pale. Only when a wolf lord from the south and a horn king from beyond the wall came together did the black crown fall. They called him the Night's King, and they erased his name from stone and story, as if forgetting could undo what had happened. But forgetting only sends the memory somewhere else to rest until it is needed again. Another song, told by those who set more store by the children's whisperings than in men's carved names, claims there was not one such king but many across the ages, each a chapter written by Winter's hand in the same sharp script. Both songs agree on the important thing. There are always people who will turn toward the cold because it promises to quiet pain, and there is always a price. There were quiet centuries after the long night, quiet, not empty. At the ends of the world, where the sky has a particular thinness like old silk, people still saw figures at the edge of their vision. Men on the wall leaned over Merlin's and felt a keener wind some nights, wind that smelled like the inside of a cave and the forgotten corners of a locked room. Some recruits found a glimmering piece of black stone, half buried by a drift, and thought it was only a pretty rock until their fingers went numb holding it. The few who studied the last of the green lore said such stone, the dragonglass, turned Winter's servants to something that could not hold itself together. The watchmen stacked those stones in chests. Most of the chests were misplaced for other chests that held food and candles and letters. That is how it is with things the world won't admit it needs until it does. Then came a century when the forests seemed to sigh more often, and the birds' flights took strange angles. Wolves began ranging in packs again, lean and cocked like arrows. Snow lay longer in the hollows, fires took more kindling. In that time, the wild folk told of a man who made a bargain with the cold. In exchange for his safety, he left his sons to the woods as offerings. The blue-eyed figures took what was given, and the giving went on for years because a bargain is easier to keep than a fight when your nights are full of teeth. Those who came later to the empty homestead found the shining tracks of something that did not sink, and the small marks that infants' bodies leave when they are carried away by hands that do not warm what they hold. The living made their usual mistake. They believed this cruelty belonged only to the cruel man. They did not see that it belonged to the winter that was watching them all along. The first blow fell far from any stone chair or list of names. It came in the high country where men in black marched because they were told to, and because duty, when it is honored, makes different kinds of men stand shoulder to shoulder. They camped on a rise that was old when the first story was told, and they lit fires, and the fires ran low. In the hour between midnight and dawn, the snow around them lifted its head and looked back. Blue eyes opened in faces that remembered nothing and wanted nothing except to copy the will that called them. The men fought with iron and with courage. Both had their uses and both broke. When morning tried to make a claim upon that land, it could not. The dead who did not rise lay under white sheets that would not melt, and the dead who did rise went out over the ridges at the call of something too quiet for human ears. Word of such things travels poorly over mountains and through politics. Men listen to storms only when the roof leaks. But the wild folk heard. They always do. They began to move in great ragged flocks toward the wall. Not because they wished to be ruled by any South King, but because they knew the difference between a man's law and a winter's law. The wall meant shelter. It meant a place to stand with your back against something that did not move. Their chiefs called parley with the men in black, and in the telling of that parley you can hear what the old oaths were meant to do. Keep the living from arguing when it was time to stand together. Some in black remembered that. Some did not. Such is the weight of any vow. It hangs differently on different necks. On a bleak shore where the sea ate cliffs and spat up ice like broken mirrors, the White Walkers came not as raiders but as an event. They arrived with a slow patience that made flight look foolish. Mothers pressed children to their chests. Men with axes tested their edges and found them good and still felt their bellies turn with a child's fear. The cold moved before the walkers, wrinkling the water, frosting the inside of lungs. They stepped into a village and tore out its calendar. They did not hurry. The living ran. Boats strained under hands that pulled them to sea. Those who stayed to fight found their blades snapping like stale bread when they struck the deep-iced armor of their foe. Off the shingle, the pale king himself stood upon the strand and watched as if this were a lesson he adjudicated. When the last screams gave out, he lifted both arms, and the motions that followed were not sorcery so much as an instruction. The dead stood again and opened their eyes to the color that meant they now belonged to a frostbound thought. The living who watched it happen felt the bottom drop out of hope, as if the ground had been stolen from under their feet while they were still standing. After that, the cold was not rumor. It was schedule. It came to watchtowers, to fishing camps, to lonely steadings where the dogs went thin and the woodpile shorter and the talk grew flat. Men in black scrabbled in old chests for the black glass, and when they found that obsidian shard wrapped in waxed cloth, they found that it sang in the hand like a bee. They proved once again that thought and tool can partner to make a new promise. The walkers, for all their age and silence, could be broken if the tool was true and the will steady. And there were blades, old and rippled with a color like water at depth, that refused to shatter when they met the walker's cold. Those were scarce, as all good things are, but in their few strokes lay the reminder that nothing in the world is unanswerable, not even winter. At the edge of the world, a king of winter killed a dragon with a spear of ice that flew true as a line drawn by regret. The beast tumbled screaming into black water and rose later with frost burning blue in its throat, eyes lit by the same gaslight as its masters. With that dragon's broken fire, the wall was wounded, and a gap opened in what people thought was permanent. Imagine the sound. Ice screaming, stone groaning, the deep bass note of old promises breaking. Men ran in patterns too small to matter against such an event. The pale ranks poured through. Snowy plains, once alive only with fox and wind, filled with a new kind of life that was only movement. Bears lumbered, eyes crackling blue. A giant came, its steps like dropped stones, its face a cave of frost. The White Walkers walked among their tens of thousands of willed bodies, and wherever their feet fell, dew froze on eyelashes, breath smoked and then died unsmoked, and the world narrowed to the shape of a small fire and those who huddled around it. The living drew into bastions of wood and stone. They sharpened glass. They polished old steel that had survived older wars. They wrote letters that said, "I am not afraid," and then they burned the letters because such sentences are always written for the writer. In hall and hut and keep they waited. To wait for winter is its own work. It teaches you what matters by taking everything else. Now imagine a night so thick with weather that sound itself moves heavily. Imagine torches hissing in snow, ladders against walls, men and women on the parapets with scarves tied under their chins, eyes running from the wind. Imagine a field washed in moonless dark, with only a few thin fires like scattered prayers. The dead move through that dark without complaint, because complaint needs warmth. The living move with purpose and with fear, because purpose and fear are the same tree with different fruit. Every blow in that night is a small story, a thought made into emotion, emotion made into a chance. The cold wings and meets stubbornness. When blades of old temper meet frost-born swords, there is a ringing like the crack of a pond in deepest winter. The air itself seems to grow brittle. Your breath hurts. Your eyes water. Still, you do not step back because stepping back is just a way of falling more slowly. The pale king walks through such a storm as if the wind were an old acquaintance. He has never spoken a word that anyone has heard, and in this silence is its own doctrine. Some say his purpose is simple, to turn the page of the world to a blank one. Others say he is after memory, that he wants to rub out every mark, every story, until the earth is as clean and cold as the first morning of time. A boy who sees more than he says sits beneath a bare tree and knows the pale king is coming. He knows it not with fear, but with the weight of what must be. Ravens turn circles overhead and then flee, because some meetings are private even to birds. The pale king comes to end a line not of blood but of remembering. He reaches for the last fires that refuse to go out, because to put out those fires is easier than to understand what warmth is. At the heart of that storm, an old blade finds its moment. It is small and unassuming, like so many things that change the course of events. It was once meant for something else. It has passed through more hands than stories know, each grip polishing the truth of what iron can become when it remembers the heat that forged it. In a single breath that is not long but is deep, the blade finds the one space left by pride and patience, and the pale king shatters. It is not a scream. It is the collapse of an architecture. It is ice returning to what it was before it was arranged into a crown and a will. His lieutenants go with him, unmade to the instant of their making, and in the fields and on the walls and in the snows, the dead go still. You can hear it as silence, but not the silence of winter's domination. The other kind, the blessed kind, the room after a fever breaks. Torches flare. People realize they are still alive and begin to pay the price that aliveness demands. The counting of the absent. Dawn comes like an embarrassed guest, late and apologetic. The snow that once seemed to enforce law now looks like the linen of an unmade bed. The living, raw-eyed and hollow-cheeked, look at each other and find that the world has not ended, which is its own shock. They come down off the walls. They gather their dead. They do not sing at first. Singing comes later, when hands are a little warmer and names can be spoken without breaking. The dragon that burned blue falls from the sky at last in a sheet of white smoke and black wing and crashes to the earth like the ending of a bad dream that was real. In a day or two, the winds will smooth its bones. Everything in the north eventually becomes a shape under snow. What remains of the White Walkers is a question and a scar. Did the first cold die with the Pale King? Does winter know how to end itself? The children say nothing because there are not many children left and their language has gone back to the trees. Men say too much because that is what men do when afraid. But there are truths anyone can hold. One is that the world keeps both memory and change in her pockets and pulls out whichever she needs. Another is that walls, whether of ice or promise, are not replacements for watchfulness. And a third is that the White Walkers were not merely enemies. They were the shape the cold took when it learned to aim at what hurts us most, our stories. They wanted rooms without voices. They wanted meals without laughter, roads without footprints, years without birthdays. They wanted a world where snow remembered everything because no one else did. After the battle that ended winter's long experiment with kingship, there were winters still and will be again. Snow fell on the shoulders of farmers cleaning tools at sundown. Children pressed their noses to panes to watch flakes dissolve on their breath. Wolves left neat lines of tracks that stitched the hills to the woods. In all that ordinary winter work, you can find the answer to what the White Walkers forgot. Cold is part of the pattern. It is the stillness that lets the seed sleep and the earth pause. It sharpens the stars. But it cannot be all of it. There must also be thaw, the sudden trickle that sounds like distant bells, the wet smell under leaves, the first fly. The Pale Kings wanted forever night and perfect rest. The living, even the quietest among them, require dawn. In the years that followed, the watchmen in black mended what they could. They raised timbers and patched stairs and set new stones into old gaps. They stood on the wall that was not what it had been and looked north to a land now emptied of that particular silence. They told the old stories to recruits who would yawn the first time and listen the fifth. They sharpened the last of the black glass and stored it not because they expected to use it, but because the keeping of such things is itself a vow. They carved new names on their boards and read the old ones aloud in the hall, and the voices of the dead warmed the room more than the fire did. The wild folk crossed and recrossed the line where the wall gaped. Some went south and found space for their lives among tilled fields and villages where someone always had advice. Others went back to the clean cold because it fit their breath. They brought their children to the foot of the wall, sometimes to show them the thing that had divided their history, and the children looked up the vast face of ice and stone and felt small the way you do when you stand before a mountain or a sea. The good smallness that teaches humility, not the bad smallness that teaches fear. Old women sat with their backs to the sun and told what they remembered. They spoke of men made empty by blue eyes and of hands so cold they burned, and of the day the sky went dark as if a great burr had flown before the sun. They told also of the way soup tastes after such a day, and the way a child's hand feels when it slips into yours in the crowd. They made the terrible into something you can carry, which is what stories are for. Once in a while, someone out on a high ridge hears a sound that makes them turn slow and careful, the way a deer turns before deciding to spring. Once in a while, a hunter finds, wind-scoured and unlikely, a shard of ice with a seam inside it like a remembered frown. Once in a while, the pines hush so suddenly you can hear the powder of snow settling. In those moments, the world suggests that not everything ends when we think it does. It suggests that what has happened can happen again if we leave the door unbarred and forget we once had a reason to keep watch. This is not a threat so much as a responsibility. The living must be both tender and wary. They must plant and harvest and sing and mend, And they must also look north on clear nights when the air is glass and the stars are needles, and they must listen. Not to be afraid, but to remember. As for the Pale King himself, some say he was only ever a tool of an older will, the way a knife is not hunger and a fire is not cruelty. Some say he loved something once, before the glass went in and the tree eyes watched him turn. Some say he did not think at all, that he was only winter incarnate, and instruction given legs. Perhaps all these are true in the little ways that truths are true inside stories. What matters to those who sit by the coals late is what such a king taught. He taught that forgetting our oldest promises makes a fine bridge for winter to cross. He taught that the dead still belong to us until we abandon them, and that the ground itself will give them back if asked by the wrong voice. He taught that the cold can be beautiful and still mean you harm. And he taught, finally, that a single instant of clear will, a blade at the right moment, a stand made with the right stubbornness, can unmake even the most patient tyranny. Now the snow lies on the moors the way it always has, soft at the edges and crisp where the wind writes it. A fox limns its line across the white, tail painting a question mark. The rivers wear their thin caps and then shed them by noon. Doors creak open, breath plumes and dissolves. Someone sets a bowl of warm water outside for a stray cat and laughs to see the little wet paw prints track back toward the barn. In kitchens and halls and caves, fires crackle, making those small, democratic sounds that tell you a room is alive. Sap popping, wood settling, metal winking as it heats. People talk about taxes, births, fences, chores, feuds, dances, rain. They talk almost not at all about the winter that wore a crown. That is the mercy of ordinary life. It fills the gaps where fear would otherwise sit. But when the little ones ask, when they pull at sleeves and say, "Tell us the old story," someone always obliges. The teller's voice goes lower, not to frighten, but to invite listening. The names come out softly. The wall, the watch, the walkers, the night that would not break. The story ends the way it must, with a sunrise, with doors opening onto snow that will not last all day, with the living deciding to keep living. Snow remembers. People remember in their own ways. A scrap of glass kept in a drawer. An old oath spoken at the lintel on the first night of real frost. A glance northward for no reason anyone can name. The White Walkers may be gone into that place where unneeded nightmares go, but their lesson is still busy. Warmth needs tending. Memory needs telling. Doors need bars, and bars need lifting when it is time to welcome. Between those acts the world balances, quiet and grand as a sleepwalker on a high ledge. And somewhere far out in the cold that speaks in hushes, something old rolls over in its rest and settles deeper, as if even winter itself has learned that there is a time to move and a time to wait, a time to take and a time to leave well enough alone. The living lie down under quilts and listen to the soft song of logs breaking into embers. They let their thoughts slow until they drift like the biggest flakes of snow, the ones that fall last and cover the older prints. They breathe in, they breathe out. The story holds them and then lets them go, the way a patient season holds the land and then, with no fuss, becomes another. In the hush that follows a long winter, the world learns again how to make small sounds. A yoke creaks over a field, and it is as if the earth clears its throat. A door latch lifts and settles. A note so ordinary you might think it had been playing all along beneath the louder weather. Meltwater works its way through the ribs of culverts and old roots. It speaks the language of backrooms and cellar stairs, those secret places where coolness lingers even on warm days. Smoke thins from hearths that have burned through nights without counting them. All these are the world's first attempts at song after silence, and they are gentle because gentleness is the wisdom that returns when the terrible is finished. On the broad moors north of the long scar of ice, sun spends itself slowly, a gold coin that takes all day to drop. The heather shows its wines and plums, shy at first, then unembarrassed. The wind that once came like a knife now moves as a hand brushing crumbs from a table. If you walk there, you can still feel where the cold once gathered. The hollows that hold their chill even at noon. The shadows that stay grainy long after the light has swept over the slopes. Those are the rooms winter liked best. It sat in them, patient, counting the heartbeats of rocks. To step into such a pocket is to enter a recollection. The air is tidier there, the sound less cluttered. You could think a thought and hear it come back to you unbent. In little steadings hammered up in the lee of crags, people tell each other how they knew the long dark was endy.
No day.
A woman speaks of waking and hearing, for the first time in months, the small choral of sparrows in the thatch, as if the roof had given birth to gossip. A man describes his hands, how the ache in his knuckles loosened at last, how his grip stopped feeling like a stranger's. A girl confesses that she dreamed of colors, of the red of her mother's scarf and the blue of a river under ice, and when she woke the world contained color again, less urgent than the dream but more useful. Among these accounts, no one mentions the one who broke the pale crown. They speak around that fact the way people walk around a grave not yet settled. They honor by omission. They soothe by not scratching the wound. In the halls of learning where candles burn all day as if to command the dark by law, men and women dip quills and write winter into paragraphs. They choose words like careful carpenters choosing plank and peg, season terms that will not warp. From the outside, the sound is a soft scratching, a small insect persistence. Inside the sound is judgment. What is history if not an agreement to tell a story the same way enough times that it begins to behave? Yet even here, even with their ledgers and their charts of sunrise and frost, the scholars concede in their margins what they cannot spool out into sentences. They admit that storms have moods. They note that a region can remember. They draw the sigil that stands for what they call deep cold and then remark in a hand so small it is almost a prayer that deep cold travels like a king with a retinue, walking softly enough that the ground forgets to complain. On certain nights when the wind does not know which direction to choose and stands baffled among the trees, the old ones dream of faces cut into white bark. In their dream, the faces are not merely carvings but openings, the kind of window through which no air moves, only attention. Eyes the color of winter milk look without blinking. Lips that never learned speech seem on the verge of it. From beyond those faces comes a hum like the inside of a shell held to the ear, a slow and almost contented music that has nothing to do with rooms or fires. The dreamers wake with a taste like mineral water in their mouths and a feeling that they have been witnessed. They speak no word of fear. They make themselves tea and sit at the door, watching the dark turn into a detail, a hill and a path and a low stone wall, while the kettle ticks itself cool. What remains of the walker's craft persists in little artifacts the living recover without fanfare. A plow strikes something squealsome in the field and the farmer, expecting a rock, lifts out a length of glass that drinks daylight and gives back a faint, uncolored glow. A child setting snares finds a ring of ice in a hollow where there has been no water, a ring whose edge is so perfect it reflects the world as if from the surface of a pupil. A band of shepherds wintering high in the hills come upon a cairn toppled by thaw and under it a shard like a leaf pressed between pages. Thin, brittle-looking, but so strong that even a hard heel will not break it. They pass it hand to hand and each feels, for a blink, that his breath belongs to someone else. They keep such discoveries not out of greed. There is no coin in them, but out of the instinct that tells a mason not to discard a chisel that once saved a wall. South near the seas that keep their own counsel, sailors add a new mark to the language of storms. It is a small scrawl on their weather boards, a wave leaning into a spear of light. When a certain pallor comes over the waves at dusk and the gulls carry their bellies low to the water and the sound inside the wind feels like a room no longer being lived in, they speak of a chill traveling under the surface. It does not break the skin of the water. It revises the thought of the water. Nets come up shining with rime though the day has been mild. The fish inside them gleam as if the scales themselves remember something very ancient about dark. The men spit and make signs not out of superstition. They would tell you they are too practical for that, but because movement in the air is a kind of answer to a question no one has asked aloud. In a tower built for listening to the sky, an old man whose hair has gone as soft as down keeps jars of powders that he sprinkles onto coals to coax certain hues from the flame. He has spent years learning the disclosures of heat, the way a blue tongue will confide what a yellow one will not. When he feeds the coals a pinch of ground stone taken from the far north, the stuff that once was fire and then memorized its own extinguishing, He watches the flame lower itself as a deferent courtier lowers his gaze. No color presents. The fire grows precise. When he warms a shard of ancient blade upon those same coals, the air scents not of metal but of river water at night. He records these things in a script almost no one reads. He is not certain why he bothers. It comforts him to imagine that the world collects receipts for its troubles. In the forests that survived iron and winter both, a few of the small folk remain, though most who speak of them do so as one speaks of distant uncles, with affection that floats because it does not have to work. Those that remain tend to the old faces and the old places where roots drink deeper than thirst. They move without the snow's permission but never without its notice. Their hair holds twigs and the smell of rain. They listen to the underground rivers, those humming spines beneath the land, and when they whisper in the groves it is to ask that the water remember what it learned during the long dark. They are not afraid of wolves. They are not impressed by men's walls. They make small circles of black glass around seedlings, not to trap anything but to teach the sapling what it might need to know about patience. On a bare ridge where lightning often rehearses, a watchman in black stands with his sea, Loke pulled tight under his chin. He knows the names of only 6 of the thousands of stars overhead, but he knows their habits, the little hesitations in their rising, the steady sternness of their winter gaze, the way they seem both near enough to warm a cheek and far beyond the idea of travel. He leans on the parapet and thinks about the stories told to frighten boys into good behavior. The ice-eyed men, the dark king, the day the wall wept. He is not frightened now. It is not that he does not believe. It is that belief has found a proper place among other beliefs, that wood smoke clings to wool, that boots rot if not dried, that a hand put upon a shoulder can hold a man together. He nods to the north as if to a neighbor who has moved away and may one day return. He keeps the cup of his breath near his mouth and warms himself with it by sipping from the air. There is a meadow notched into the mountains where the first flowers always open sideways, as if speaking to something lying on the grass beside them. In early spring it is bright with the little cups of crocus, yellow and white and the kind of purple that insists upon itself. People who come there sometimes walk as if not to disturb a sleeping animal. At the upper edge of the meadow lies a scatter of stones too regular to be natural, too amateur to be a true wall. Some ancestor, the chatter goes, wanted to keep something out or something in, and then learned better. In a niche between 2 stones glows a slip of glass that once lay in a chest under a different sky. It has watched snow fall in every style and praised each style for its thoroughness. It has seen summer come with its insects and its carelessness. If it could speak, it would say that everything is happening again, though never in quite the same way, and that this is either mercy or mockery depending upon whether you are warm when you hear it. The dead of that long season are not gone as men reckon gone. They have been returned to the way the world keeps herself fed. Ash in the garden, bone meal in fields, names spoken on anniversaries so that syllables can carry souls a little further down the road. In kitchens, it is understood that a recipe perfected in the dark has the right to be made forever. A thick soup, a bread that stays soft for days, a stew that tastes like being believed. In certain halls, a chair is left empty not because the absent one might return. Absence has manners, and true absence knocks no more, but because the act of leaving room honors the shape of the life that once occupied it. Winter, for all its hunger, has a way of teaching this thrift. We learn not to waste what we cannot replace. There are always new children, and so there are always new questions. They ask whether the Pale King had a heart, and if he did, where he kept it. They want to know if his fingers were numb or if the cold was his feeling. They want to know whether the walkers slept standing up like horses, or whether at dawn they lay down and let the frost cover them as a blanket might. The answers are stories, not facts, and need not be agreed upon. One telling says the king did have a heart, but it was given away long before the glass went in and the old tree watched. Another insists he never understood warmth as anything except something that happened to other people. A third says he loved the quiet and wished to make a world where quiet could rule, not seeing that quiet is only sweet when chosen, never when enforced. As for the walkers, some say they walked always because movement kept the world from remembering how to thaw. Others say they lay beneath the slope of the land like spoons under a linen. Small, clean, precise. The children measure these answers against their own experience of blankets and frostbite and decide for themselves. Not all bargains with winter were made in fear. Some were made in a misunderstood good faith. In a valley that receives dusk before its neighbors, a crofter's great-grandmother struck a pact with the cold for clean ice to keep milk sweet. She hung a charm of black glass over the well, and it worked. Through summers drowsy with flies, the pails stayed cool, the butter firmed as if out of principle. In return, she promised a silence, and she kept it, but silence is not hers to give. The silence grew a thicket around the farm, and people stopped visiting and then stopped remembering. Only when her great-grandchildren found the old charm, dull now, its edge softened, did conversation return to the yard. They hung the shard by the barn where it broke light up into ordinary rainbows, and they say the well water tastes of stone again, which is to say it tastes as it should. From the far reaches where the aurora reads itself in slow cursive across the night, comes a tale of a hunter who followed an elk with a white mane for 3 days and 3 slow nights. The animal never quite tired. It paused long enough to make the following look plausible, then cantered beyond sight with a grace that mocked the idea of effort. On the 4th dawn the hunter found, not the elk, but a field of needles of ice standing upright as if grown that way. They chimed in the same wind that carried the smell of the elk's passage. The hunter stepped carefully and sat among them and let the chimes tell him what he was doing. He turned for home before the sun had reason to notice him. He told no one at his fire what he had seen because he did not yet have the words that would not turn the occurrence into a trick. Months later, when young men boasted of killings done in the cold, he stood and said that sometimes the mercy is in the leaving alone. They laughed, because laughter is the shield of the unacquainted. He did not mind. He had learned a new kind of listening, and it did not rely on applause. Somewhere below a ridge that squirrels use like a road lies a lost entrance to the old dark places where the black glass was mined by hands who knew the difference between digging and tray bassing. The passage is blocked by a fall of rock that remembers the moment when gravity reclaimed something it had loaned. No one has walked there in 100 remembered years, but a thin shaft still carries air to that deep room. On days when the earth is pleased with itself, a sweetness rises from the shaft, a mineral perfume that, to those who know, smells like the first evening after harvest. It is the breath of a seam that has not been exhausted. If the living ever descend again, they will find the glass waiting, patient in its own way, neither wishing to be used nor refusing it. Tools do not have wishes. Wishes belong to the hands. In the city where everything is for sale and therefore nothing costs what it is worth, minstrels garnish their songs with winter. They make the long night wear a rhyme like a borrowed coat. They turn blue eyes into candles because candles are flattering. They sell the shiver and evade the lesson. Audiences wipe away tears and feel wonderfully sorry for themselves for a time, and then go out into alleys where other stories wait with less glamour and more insistence. Yet sometimes late, when the tavern has emptied and the singer sits with the keep and the keep's son by the slumped fire, a true song comes, the sort that is more remembering than performance. It is quiet, with spaces in it where the listener can sit down. It talks of a room where a few stayed awake because they had to and made tea while listening, the way one listens to the sky in a storm for the sound that means a roof is nearly gone. It talks of a hand finding another in the dark, not because of love but because of need, and love growing to meet the need as vines are drawn to a trellis. The keep's son does not forget that song. Years later, when a storm slants in and makes the roof boards ache, he will pour tea at midnight and count heads and feel brave. If the Pale King ever dreamed, the world did not know it while it mattered. When the end came for him, it came as ends always come, not as a poem but as a physical correction. Yet endings are not walls. They are doors with a certain gravity. On nights when the first frost flowers the trough and the bucket handle smooths itself of the day's sweat, some who wake to poke a fire sense an interval, the little space the world keeps for possibilities that are neither here nor there. In that space, what was a person and then a principle might drift the way a moth drifts after you blow out the candle. It is not a haunting. It is the air making a note to itself. Even kings of winter become minor clerks of the atmosphere in the end. If they have regrets, they make of them ice halos around the moon and trust the cryptic to do its work. South of the snow line, armies put up tents and take them down again, practicing a tidiness that war requires and morality does not. A captain, whose face has been weathered into something honest by years of weather and orders, drills his company in the use of fire not as weapon but as companion. He makes them light and douse, and asks each to recite what he learned from the dark. The answers vary. Someone says, always know where the water is. Another says, do not talk where you can listen. A third says, let the dog go first. The captain nods at each, not because all are equally wise, but because each belongs to the person who speaks it and therefore deserves its small seat at the table. When the first real winter of their lives comes to those soldiers, they will not think of the Pale King. They will think of kindling sorted and kept dry and a blanket shaken out before dawn to rid it of what the night has decided to collect. At the last hut before the true wastes begin, a woman named for a mountain keeps a cupboard for travelers. It contains what cupboards always contain when they are operated by love disguised as management. A little salt, a little sweet, a square of linen mended so often it has become more mend than cloth. In the back is a box that her mother told her never to open, never as in not until you know in your knees the reason you are lifting the lid. One year, a winter not especially hard but insistent, the box asked for daylight. Inside lay a piece of winter-wrought iron hammered thin, and then folded and hammered thin again until the smith had satisfied whatever inside him needed something perfectly severe. Mountain took the piece in her hand and understood nothing except that it belonged to a future moment where it would be needed. She slid it into the seam of her door so that a sliver protruded where a palm might meet it. People who have slept in that hut say they dream of a hallway they have not yet walked down with doors that are not yet numbered. They wake rested as if a guard had kept the corridor all night. There is a way the wind moves through the dead reeds of a frozen fen that will make any listening animal lift its nose. It is not louder than other winds. It has a design. In the long night, that sound drove flocks and men alike into foolishness. In the years after, shepherds teach their dogs to ignore it, and the dogs, who are good at learning what their people need, do so. Even so, once or twice a winter a pup pricks its ears and, with its mouth closed, drafts the old whisper into its chest and carries it home. The sound makes the hut door stick, not from cold but from reminiscence, the wood remembering the season when it bowed to a different will. The pup shivers once, not from fright but from the small honor of bearing a history. It sleeps and dreams of running, and in its dream it runs both ahead of snow and behind it, twin dogs teaching each other there is a way through. In the north there are stones that sit shoulder to shoulder the way old men sit on benches by the harbor. Every few winters someone drags one of those stones aside to search for what the land keeps under such lids, and beneath is always one of three things: earth that seems to have been left behind by an older version of itself, a little room no larger than a barrel where the air has gone old and kindly, or a hole that looks deep until you drop a pebble and hear it laugh after a very long time. Once in 100 liftings, there is a fourth thing: a hollow full of clear snow that does not melt when you touch it but allows your hand to pass through without contradiction. Those who find this fourth thing do not tell. It is not selfishness. It is ceremony. They put the stone back and sit upon it and feel older and not at all burdened. They carry the weight of that snow in their manner afterward, the way some carry a scar and others a song. South in the gardens where figs are wrapped for winter like small sleeping heads, a woman who writes plays for a living sets quill to parchment to make the cold behave. She gathers three characters: a man who carries an out-of-season blossom under his tongue so that he will always have a taste of spring when words fail him, a girl with a lantern who refuses to let walls explain themselves to her, and a soldier who is no good at fairness but excellent at particular promises. She places them on a road that keeps looping back to a gate under a hill that will not open for any of them because that is not the work of the gate. In the third act, which she writes with her gloves off, the man, the girl, and the soldier sit on the verge and share a loaf and find that eating together breaks the enchantment of the road. She smiles to have discovered such a plain cure for such a ceremonious curse. When she reads the play aloud to friends, they laugh at how simple the end is. She laughs too. The cure for an enchanted winter was always going to be simple. It only had to be done together. What became of the places where the dead learned obedience is a question for those who like their questions to be furniture, to be sat in and thought upon. Some claim those fields are forever thin, that light skips over them like a stone over water. Others insist that the ground welcomed the end with a hiss and then a sigh and now puts out grass as thick as a horse's mane to make up for the old economy. Farmers who plow those acres say nothing of either theory. They complain as farmers do, about rocks, about weather, about the way a blade can chew through harness faster than good sense. And then they hold their hat to their chest for a moment after turning a furrow, the way men hold their hats when entering a church. It is not reverence. It is acknowledgement. The earth has hosted a great deal. It deserves a nod. When winter approaches now, people prepare in the usual ways. Cords of wood stacked like tidy arguments, jars of preserves lined up like gems in cool pantries, roofs inspected for those small, treacherous loosenesses that grow into invitation. But in some houses, there is one more task. On the first true frost, someone stands in the doorway with a piece of black glass in the palm and whispers a sentence only the household knows. Sometimes it is a blessing. Sometimes it is a promise. Sometimes it is a rebuke to what once walked. Always the words are the same from year to year. Always they end with a name. The glass does nothing visible. That is the way of the best enchantments. They work in the habit and the heartbeat. Along a river that finally remembered how to be itself, a boatman carries a coffin made from a tree that once watched battles without any of the human complications that names attach to battles. He pushes off from the muddy bank and lets the current tell him everything he needs to know about steering. The coffin is very light because the one inside lived small and left gently. Along the far bank, children pick stones to throw and, warned by a glance from a mother who has learned about glances, lower their hands and attend to the passing as one attends to the weather, the respectful way, noticing, naming, not intervening. The boatman touches his pole to the bottom and thinks, not of the dead in his care, but of another dead who was not in anyone's care at the end, who stood and shattered and taught him not to confuse scale with importance. He hums to himself, and the song is not sad. It is only careful. There is a village in the far northwest where joke-tellers claim it was winter that invented exaggeration. They say winter made fish grow a foot every time you tell the story of catching them. That winter stretched distances like cloth and shrank floors under drunk men as if the earth itself were laughing. They say winter taught lovers to mistake staying for love and leaving for bravery, and then laughed at the mix-ups it caused. People in that village carry more laughter than other folk. Laughter is their hot drink. When the first snow arrives, they perform an old comedy at the crossroads. Old because it has only one punchline and it always lands. A man with a crown made of woven birch pretends to freeze and the crowd pretends to be very impressed, and then a girl with a scarf the color of beets pokes him in the arm with a stick and he breaks into pieces of paper that blow away. Everyone claps and then helps gather the paper, because litter is not part of the joke. They teach their children this play as one teaches a prayer, until it fits in the mouth and makes the chest feel taller. Not all wounds show. A woman who mended boots through the long dark now finds she cannot sleep unless her hands are busy. She sews useless things. A saddle for a rocking horse with no rider, a coat for a kettle, a purse too small for coins but perfect for a feather. People give her projects for the pleasure of it. A glove that wants a partner, a button that misses its hole. Her fingers learn the measure of a day by the number of tiny decisions a stitch requires. When a neighbor brings her a torn cloak that once belonged to a man who left and did not return, she listens to the coat carefully before she begins. It wants only to be a cloak again, to hold weather off a body, to swing when walking. She sets her needle and mends. The neighbor tries on the cloak and looks down at his own chest as if surprised to find it there. He pays in eggs and 2 good stories. She sleeps that night without waking, hands relaxed, as if a promise had been made and kept. In a library that smells of beeswax and ink and a little damp, a monkish woman keeps a ledger of names of storms. She invented this labor because it pleased her to make of weather a family. She writes down the first day the storm is noticed, and the last and what it preferred: roofs, barns, young trees. She writes who in the town learned from it, who was humbled, who was merely annoyed. In a smaller hand, she adds a quiet note. Which child laughed in the midst of it? Which dog bounded? which old man stood in the doorway and wagged his head with that combination of irritation and admiration reserved for honest work, even when it is unwelcomed. When she reaches the long night in her ledger, she does not write one word. She writes a row of small empty boxes, neat as windows in a barracks, and then she closes the book and dusts the cover with the sleeve of her robe. She says to the empty room what everyone who lived through it eventually says: "That happened. We are happening too." Far out where the snow becomes a kind of ocean that does not melt but travels slowly toward its own idea of a shore, there is a crack in the world. It is not a crevasse that will swallow a man whole. It is a seam barely wide enough to admit a wish. In summer it sings faintly, the sound a tea kettle makes when you take it off the fire but it hasn't quite finished with its boiling. In winter it goes quiet, and then on a single night, no moon, no wind, a sky so starry it looks stitched, the seam emits one small breath. What issues forth is older than fear and younger than remorse. It is not a warning. It is the earth practicing a note to see if it still suits her. A fox asleep under the lip of a drift flicks an ear. The stars do not change. A bird shifts one foot to a better place on its branch and resettles feathers with the tidy little shakings that mean business is concluded. In the courts where rulers barter tomorrow for today, there is always someone who wants to make winter into a law. They draw lines on maps as if cold would obey ink. They press the old stories into the service of new arguments, turn the long night into a warrant for their favorite certainty. Yet in the quieter rooms behind the court, where bread is torn and dipped into stew, where the air is good with onion and rendered fat, sits an advisor who has learned the worth of the ordinary. He says to the one who sits too high to see the ground that no wall or charter keeps out weather. He recommends that granaries be kept full, that roads be maintained, that hot wine be given in the squares on the coldest nights without questions. He asks that those with nothing be given blankets that are not the old military kind that smell of foot and resignation, but new blankets, woven with intention, because gifts carry the character of their givers. He reminds his master that the watch is not a story but a practice. The ruler nods slowly, not because agreeing is easy, but because the body recognizes sense even when the mind wants something more dramatic. There are whispers still of a white queen who walked naked beside a black king, winter and night paying each other compliments in the old way. There are whispers of a horn blown only once in a century that calls bears down from the hills to sit like jurors. There are whispers that somewhere under the sea there is a place where drowned men stand upright with hair flowing like weed and watch the long procession of currents as if expecting someone. Whispers are how the world keeps a place set for wonder at tables where fact is served too hot. Children lean over their bowls to hear better. The old lean back and let the whispers braid themselves into the braid of their hair. The middle-aged smile and salt their food and tell themselves they are too busy for whispers, and then find, at candle flame's edge, that they recall all of them without trying. When the first true storm of a new winter arrives, it comes over the hills with an honesty that is almost polite. There is nothing sly in its face. It is work, and it announces itself as work. Roofers lean ladders and check that their ropes run clean through the rings. Mothers shake rugs and take in one more load of wood with a sigh that belongs to a grandmother who learned that sigh from her own. Boys race each other to fetch water and pretend not to be proud when someone says thank you. Geese lower their necks and consider the matter with the seriousness of committee chairs. Snow follows, not the fierce, glassy snow that instructs you to wish you were somewhere else, but the big flakes, lazy and decisive, that turn the world into a page waiting for writing. People write upon that page with boot and broom and laughter, and for a while the old fear and the newer lessons can sit together without argument. The storm works all night, and in the morning every fence has become a suggestion with a soft top. In that soft morning, a woman walks to the edge of her property where a weathered post stands, banded by iron that will outlast it. She places upon it a little figure she has carved from a sliver of the old wall. Nothing grand, a small person with hands outstretched as if to test the snow. She made it years ago and kept it in a drawer because she did not know what to do with it, but this morning it announces its place. The figure faces north. The woman goes back inside and, without thinking, puts another log on the fire, not because it is needed, but because the sound of it settling is the sound the room lives by in cold months. The figure gathers snow on its shoulders and grows older by the hour in the way things do when they receive weather without complaint. Birds land beside it and hop twice as if to measure. Visitors pause and, not knowing why, lower their voices a little. A child touches it with both hands and feels only wood and cold, which is all children need to feel to make a story. Some say the White Walkers were undone completely. Some say they were returned to their elements. Ice, intention, patience, and that the elements now wander the world without uniforms, seeping into new places where they will learn new manners. In this telling, a certain kind of stillness in a churchyard, a certain crispness in a statement, a certain pleasure a clerk takes in an empty ledger can be traced like a family line back to the old kings. But this lineage is not wicked. It is part of the furniture. We are not only defended by warmth, we are defined by it. Winter teaches the definition's edges. That was always the original curriculum. The instructors simply grew too proud of their lesson. Beyond the last house on the last lane of the last village, there is a field no one uses because it offers nothing. Soil too thin for wheat, grass too sour for sheep. It lies open to the north and will not be fenced, having refused every attempt with a tendency to lie down in the night and let posts come clear of their holes. Those who are too restless for sleep and too tired for talk walk there with their coats clutched and their collars raised and their cheeks beginning to sting. They stand and watch the line where the land ends and the weather begins, and they do the only true magic left to them. They breathe in and out at a measured pace and let their thinking slow to the speed of a field. If they wait long enough and grant themselves the courtesy of silence, they can sometimes hear not the old kings, those were never meant to be listened to, but the snow itself rehearsing what it will say when it comes. Promises nothing. It asks only to be received with the same attention you would give to a letter from a long-ago friend who writes infrequently but always just in time. Snow remembers what people forget, but people remember what snow cannot. Snow remembers footsteps. People remember why the steps were taken. Snow remembers roofs under white weight. People remember the doorway and the hand held there for a heartbeat before parting. Snow remembers fields. People remember harvest and hunger and the face of the neighbor who shared his last jar of applesauce with a smile that said it was not heroism, only arithmetic. Together these memories make a season possible. Together they make its passing something more than a relief. When winter comes now, it is welcomed the way old age is welcomed by those who have decided to be graceful. With blankets folded at the foot of the bed, with books nearby, with a kettle that has learned to sing only when asked, with a door that sticks a little because it has absorbed so many goodbyes. And in the very far off, beyond maps and measurements, where the world keeps what she is not yet ready to share, ice moves in its cathedral work. It rises in spires so slow that mosses have dynasties between inchings. It grows galleries where light enters once each century and remembers itself on the walls. In those halls are no kings, only the vocation of cold, to be itself with dignity, to receive sky and stone and hold them in a patience that does not demand applause. If there are echoes there, they are not of marching but of melt, the drip that writes the oldest cursive upon the floor. The cathedral has no congregation and no sermon, only an organ that plays wind and the psalm that frost sings when it laces its way across a pane. That is winter's true house. It is neither cruel nor kind. It is a room we visit and leave, always leaving a little of our breath behind, breath that fogs and then is gone, proof that we were there for a moment and that the world and all her seasons go on with their large, tranquil business. On evenings when fires burn down to the good red and conversations wear themselves into comfortable thinness, someone will fetch another log and someone else will say, "Not yet, let it be coals a while." The coals think slowly. They are old thoughts. Across the table, a child slumps sideways, asleep between a sentence and its answer. A dog dreams, paws twitching, and in that small dance is recited all the roads that led from the long dark to this quiet. Outside the window, the first flakes begin to fall, separated by inches of air in which you can almost hear them deciding who will land where. The house takes a breath and lets it out, boards settling into their winter posture. The story, which is really the world, continues in the only way it ever does. By gathering what is near, by warming what can be warmed, by listening without haste to the footsteps that pass, by remembering, always, not to confuse the hush of snow with the end of speech.